Daenerys Targaryen stood on the high terrace of the Great Pyramid. The glittering city of Meereen spread out before her. The warmth of the midday sun bathed the pale stone, and in the distance, the turquoise waters of Slaver's Bay shimmered. The cries of gulls drifted on a gentle wind that caressed her silvery gold hair as she surveyed the realm she had chosen to make her own. She had once dreamed of seizing the Iron Throne in Westeros, of crossing the Narrow Sea and taking back the 7 kingdoms that had rejected her family. Yet her heart had guided her differently in the end. The plight of Essos, the people she had freed, the land that had given her both suffering and triumph, had woven itself into her destiny. She had found loyalty here, and she had found new purpose. As she gazed upon the busy streets, thronged with freedmen and merchants, she felt a stirring deep within her, a resonance of something vast and ancient, a power that was neither wholly mortal nor easily named. She turned as a low rumble echoed through the city, the call of her greatest dragon echoing against the pyramid walls. Drogon, black as night and growing larger by the day, soared in majestic arcs above the bay. He cast a giant shadow over the rooftops, terror and awe commingled below. His wings spanned nearly the width of a fighting pit now, and each time he descended to land, the earth itself seemed to quake with reverence. Daenerys had long suspected he would surpass all dragons of old, but every day it became more apparent that Drogon would indeed rival or even eclipse the legendary Balerion the Black Dread. Her heart swelled with pride at the sight of him, for he was more than just a beast. She felt him linked to her spirit and to powers that lurked in the corners of the world, powers that seemed to whisper to her in the quiet of night. Her other 2 dragons, Viserion and Regal, had grown resplendent as well. Viserion's golden scales gleamed brighter, and Regal's emerald armor took on new sheen with each passing moon. They, too, patrolled the skies. They had not perished in some tragic conflict as many had once feared. Their survival and continued growth were testaments to Daenerys' unwavering devotion and the care she had given them, even in the midst of rebellions and conspiracies. She recalled how frightened some of her advisors had been when she first resolved to keep them close, how they urged her to lock them away for safety. But she had refused, trusting in her bond with her children. Indeed, they no longer fit within mere catacombs. They roamed free, roosting atop tall structures and scorching any fool who dared threaten them or their mother. Though Meereen's citizens still maintained a respectful distance, they had begun to view the dragons with cautious pride, for the beasts symbolized the might of their queen. That morning, Daenerys had awakened to a curious dream, one that still clung to her mind like tendrils of fog. She had seen Drogon wreathed in flame, but the fire was not the furious inferno she knew. It was a light brighter than the sun, an almost holy blaze that lit the horizon. Within the depths of the flame, she had glimpsed the faint visage of a face, eyes burning red as rubies, whispering in a language older than Valyrian. The words had slipped away upon waking, but she felt them echo in her bones as if they were a promise that the Lord of Light had taken interest in her and her dragons. Had Thuras of Myr or the Red Woman, Melisandre, once spoken of such a prophecy? Daenerys could not recall precisely, but she knew enough of Lawler to recognize the presence of that fire god when it touched her. It was not just a dream. It was a calling. She considered these musings with a mix of thrill and dread. She had heard many stories of the Lord of Light, how his worshippers believed in Azor Ahai, a champion reborn to fight darkness. She had never claimed to be anyone's savior, though once she had been revered as Mysa Mother. But something about her dream told her that if she tarried here in Essos, she would uncover a greater destiny than simply ruling Meereen. Still, she had sworn to protect these freed people, to show them a life without chains. To abandon them now for the lure of prophecy felt a betrayal. Though she had chosen to remain in Essos, she was uncertain where her path would ultimately lead. For the moment, she contented herself with ensuring Meereen and the surrounding lands flourished under her watch. Yet the city was not idle. Ill tidings had arrived over the last several weeks. Caravans attacked on the roads to Yunkai and Astapor, rumors that Volantis and other distant powers conspired to see the Targaryen girl removed. But more curious than these all-too-familiar intrigues was a news story, or half a rumor, that had drifted into the city's markets like a whisper. Fisherfolk from the eastern coast told of an island long lost beneath the sea, thrust up again by the convulsions of the earth. The same rumor claimed that on this newly surfaced land were ruins, scorched black by ancient fires. And among the rubble, travelers had glimpsed eggs, dragon eggs. At first, Daenerys dismissed the talk as a fisherman's fantasy, for the lure of dragon eggs was an ancient tactic used by every charlatan across the continent. But her curiosity was piqued when multiple traders unconnected to one another repeated identical details: glittering black stone, the stench of sulfur, enormous fissures that vented steam. Something about the consistency of their accounts made her pay attention, especially once she heard an old Valyrian phrase repeated like a spell, Drogon's cradle. She summoned her closest confidants, Grey Worm, Missandei, and a few Myrinese nobles who had proven more reliable than most. She questioned each witness carefully. They described a site that lay far across the sea, closer to the Shadowlands beyond Ashai than to her present domain. The journey alone would be perilous, but Daenerys had always yearned for more knowledge of dragons. If there were indeed eggs out there, true eggs, not petrified ornaments, she had to know. Yet she could not simply abandon Meereen without a plan. Worse, venturing so far might invite the armies of her enemies to creep closer in her absence. She weighed the potential risks, searching for guidance in the memory of her dream. And so, beneath the sun's glare, she found herself gazing out at Slaver's Bay, imagining Drogon's colossal wings bearing her beyond the horizon on a quest to discover a secret that might reshape her future. She left the terrace and descended through the cool interior halls of the Great Pyramid. Echoing footfalls accompanied her down winding corridors of polished marble and sandstone. Tapestries depicting her triumphs adorned the walls, a testament to her unstoppable rise, from a timid princess with nothing to the breaker of chains. She passed a set of guards, their spears rattling in salute as she strode into the council chamber. Though it was modest in comparison to the opulent halls of Westeros, it served her well enough here. A map of Essos was spread across an oval table, every city carefully marked, from Pentos to Karth. Missandei and Grey Worm stood by, each with their own quiet dignity. They exchanged a respectful nod with their queen. "Your Grace," Missandei said softly, "the captains you summoned are here. They await your command to discuss the reports from the eastern seas." Daenerys nodded, steeling herself. It was not only about the rumored eggs. She needed to ensure her city and the lands she protected would not fall into chaos if she dared to undertake this journey. She took her seat at the head of the table, trying to summon the calm authority that had carried her this far. Two Myrinese officers approached. Both had served in her newly structured city guard, ironically named the Freedman's Shield. Their copper skin glistened in the flickering torchlight, and they bowed deeply, the slightest flicker of nerves in their eyes. Daenerys had gained a reputation for mercy, but also for swift justice. They laid out a series of parchment scrolls and waited for her signal to proceed. "Your Grace, we have alarming news from the coastal villages," said the taller of the two, a bearded man named Medgar. "Several have been set ablaze. Survivors speak of masked riders who appear suddenly at dusk, bearing steel from the shadow market. They demand tribute and slaves, though we have none to give, and when refused, they torch everything in sight. We suspect they may be funded by the remnants of the old slaver families who fled Meereen." Daenerys pressed her lips together. The notion of more slavers rising like ghosts to haunt the region made her blood boil. She had worked tirelessly to rid these lands of bondage. The other officer, a wiry woman named Hasnia, chimed in. "We have begun sending patrols, but the region is too vast. The Freedman's Shield lacks the ships to secure the waters where they travel. We believe they sail in from the east, possibly from that place the rumors speak of, or near enough to use it as a hideout. The island rumored to have re-emerged, Drogon's cradle," Daenerys said, glancing at the map. There was an unmarked expanse beyond the Jade Sea. "The fishermen tell of a black-scorched ruin. They speak of dragons and hidden passages in the stone. Could these raiders be using such a location as a secret port?" Grey Worm stepped forward, eyes flicking across the map. "We can send scouts by sea, Your Grace. If it is truly infested with these masked raiders, we will discover it. But it would not be wise to launch a full assault without knowing their strength. Even your dragons cannot be everywhere at once." Mention of her dragons gave Daenerys pause. She ran a hand over the battered table's edge, thinking of Drogon's fiery breath. If the island did harbor new threats, and possibly new dragon eggs, she could not simply remain idle. But the danger of leaving Meereen vulnerable weighed heavily on her. "Then we send scouts," she said quietly. "We gather more information. If these raiders and rumors lead us to something of significance, I will consider traveling there myself." She sensed a ripple of concern, but no one spoke. She cast her gaze around, noting the tension in each face. But let us not be ruled by fear. We have come too far. When the meeting concluded, she rose and drifted away from the council chamber, accompanied by Missandei. The corridors felt colder now, as if a chill wind blew from some unknown realm. Missandei offered a small smile and spoke in her gentle voice. "Is your heart set on going, Daenerys?" For all the formality others lavished upon her, Missandei alone could address her with such familiarity. Daenerys looked at her dear friend, seeing the concern in her dark eyes. "I'm torn," she said. "I have responsibilities here, but I feel..." A summons, Missandei, as if the very flames of R'hllor are calling me to discover something. And if there truly are new dragon eggs, how can I turn my back on that? Missandei nodded slowly. The priests of R'hllor preach that the Lord of Light has many chosen, each for a different purpose. Perhaps this is yours. Daenerys' thoughts flickered to the dream again, to the burning visage. "Perhaps," she said. "But if it is, I must face it on my own terms, not blindly follow." Days passed, marked by fervent preparations. News trickled in that the scouts had left Meereen's docks, braving waters said to be haunted by pirates and creatures from the deep. As Daenerys awaited their reports, she walked among the people of her city. She had learned that sequestering herself in the pyramid bred distrust and resentment. So she rode through the streets on horseback, escorted by a handful of unsullied, greeting citizens, listening to complaints, and stopping to settle small disputes in the open. Freedmen and women bowed to her or reached out to touch her hands, still calling her Mysa, though some wore anxious expressions. Rumors of the masked raiders had spread. People worried that a new wave of violence would wash over the region, one that might drag them back into chains if Daenerys were absent. In the late afternoon, she ascended to the top of the pyramid where the warm winds carried the tang of salt and spice. It was her custom to meet Drogon there. He often perched upon the highest spire, scanning the horizon. When she arrived, she found him crouched at the edge, a dark silhouette against the sunset. The setting sun burnished his scales a deep red at the edges, and his eyes glimmered with something akin to intelligence as he regarded her. She approached carefully, though she had no true fear of him, only respect. His massive head swung low, and he snorted a gust of hot breath that ruffled her hair. Gently, she placed a hand on the side of his jaw, feeling the roughness of scales and the latent heat pulsing beneath. She thought she heard a soft thrumming in his throat, almost a purr of recognition. "The world calls you bigger than Balerion now," she whispered, half laughing. "Is it true you will never stop growing?" Drogon only blinked slowly, pupils contracting to slits in the dying light. She took that as an answer. He flexed his wings, and with a mighty push, he soared into the sky, beating at the air until he was a fading black shape among the clouds. She watched him go with a mixture of awe and longing, grateful that Viserion and R'hllor remained alive as well. Their combined power was formidable, a testament to House Targaryen's rebirth. Yet why did she sense that something deeper, something almost divine, was moving in his wake? That evening, her dreams returned, more vivid than before. She saw a whirlwind of flame, swirling like a living thing, and in its heart stood a towering figure shaped by light. Its voice reverberated through her skull in a language she neither knew nor had heard before, yet she understood it as clearly as her native tongue. It spoke of a darkness stirring in places unseen, of shadows coiling at the edges of the world. It spoke of chains that would once again bind the innocent if she did not act. When she awoke, sweat drenched her nightgown. Moonlight streamed in through a narrow window, illuminating her trembling hands. She pressed them together, focusing on the heat that lingered along her palms. Had she merely conjured a nightmare from her worries, or was this truly a message from the Lord of Light? She found no easy answer. But each day, she heard small hints that more reavers had been spotted in the far-flung villages, that ghost stories were spooking caravans. She also received tidings that the scouts she sent out had discovered an uncharted isle matching the fishermen's descriptions. They were on their way back with more details. Tension mounted in the city, and Daenerys could feel the shape of things to come. Finally, a small ship limped into Meereen's harbor one scorching afternoon. Its sails were tattered, and its hull bore fresh scars from some fierce encounter. The men who staggered onto the dock were half-starved, eyes wide with terror. When brought before Daenerys, they spoke in halting voices of what they had found. Tyrigon's cradle was real, a jagged piece of land thrust up by volcanic upheaval. The beaches were black sand, the waters swirling with strange currents. Inland, they had glimpsed ruins that might once have been a fortress, but now everything lay half-buried or broken by seismic forces. They had ventured only so far before they noticed ominous shapes in the skies at night, shapes that resembled large winged creatures. But these were not Daenerys's dragons. Some glided silently without roaring or breathing flame. They were pale and ghostly, more akin to monstrous wyverns or a new breed entirely. One scout swore he saw eyes that glimmered with an otherworldly glow as if lit from within by some uncanny fire. Worse yet, the masked reavers seemed to have a camp there, their banners displayed openly. They wore black and red, an unsettling echo of Targaryen colors but twisted with symbols that none recognized. And the scouts had discovered something else among the ruins, stones shaped like eggs, half buried in the charred earth. They didn't dare touch them after one man who did so was seized by violent convulsions, spitting blood until he died. The survivors fled in terror. The reavers, apparently alerted to the incursion, pursued them on sleek ships. The scouts barely escaped with their lives, outmaneuvering the enemy by the slimmest of margins to return to Meereen. A hush fell over the throne room as they concluded their account. Daenerys tried to keep her composure, but the implications churned within her mind. If there were truly new dragons or dragon-like creatures emerging on this island, or if the Lord of Light's will was somehow tied to these events, she could not ignore it. Grey Worm spoke in his unflinching manner. "Your Grace, this place is dangerous beyond measure. We cannot risk you." She rose from her seat. "I will not sit idle. The raiders already threaten our shores. The rumor of these eggs holds an uncanny significance, and the presence of something that might be dragons is too important to overlook. I must see for myself." The Sandy-Eye's expression flickered between alarm and acceptance. She knew Daenerys's resolve when it was set. Then perhaps take only a small escort. Let the Unsullied protect Meereen with only a chosen few to accompany you. Daenerys considered that. Yes, Meereen must not be left defenseless. Grey Worm, you will stay and command the Freedman's Shield to keep the city safe. I cannot leave this place unguarded against the threats that circle us. But I will bring a contingent, perhaps 50 of your best men, loyal to the last breath. Grey Worm lowered his head in respect. It shall be done. Preparations commenced swiftly. Ships were readied in the harbor, sails patched and hulls reinforced. Ser Barristan Selmy was gone, dead in this version of events that had transpired before, but Daenerys still had a handful of knights who had pledged loyalty to her cause, men from Westeros who had followed the rumor of the last Targaryen across the sea. They stood ready, along with Missandei, who insisted on accompanying her. Daenerys welcomed her presence, for she would never face such peril without her dearest companion. As for her dragons, she needed no invitation. Viserion and Rhaegal would follow her across any ocean if she commanded it, and Drogon would lead. On the day of departure, Meereen turned out to witness its queen leave. Freed people lined the roads, and from the harbor walls they waved and cheered. It was a somber but determined pageantry. Daenerys boarded the flagship, a stout vessel called the Dawn's Glory, with Missandei at her side. The Unsullied chosen for the mission formed two neat lines, spears held upright, stoic as statues. As the sails caught the wind, Daenerys stood upon the prow, gazing back at the city that had become a second home. She felt a pang of guilt for leaving, though her rule had stabilized the region for now. It would have to endure without her immediate presence. She did not know how long the journey would take, or what awaited her upon that mysterious isle. But the flame within her had been kindled. She sensed that each breath she took now was in tune with the presence of R'hlloreth's own fire. The voyage was perilous indeed. Storms battered them. The skies darkened with sudden squalls that roared in from the open sea. Rain lashed the decks, and waves rose as tall as walls. Some nights, eerie phosphorescent shapes moved beneath the surface. Once, a monstrous shadow passed under the ship, large enough that Daenerys thought it might be a leviathan of legend. All the while, Drogon soared overhead, sometimes diving to skim the waves, at other times disappearing into the cloud cover. Viserion and Rhaegal flew in tandem, their cries rolling through the gale, offering some comfort to the sailors who feared the unknown. The dragon's presence seemed to keep the worst of the sea's horrors at bay, though not entirely. More than one man claimed to see giant serpents coiling in the depths, watching. By day, they pressed on eastward, guided by the best charts they could gather from Karth and beyond, though many labeled the region simply as "Here be demons." At night, Daenerys found herself assailed by more dreams. She saw a flickering figure, half man, half flame, who held a sword of living fire. It sang to her in images, a broken fortress, black sands, dragons locked in combat against shapeless shadows. She awoke each time with a start, Missandei's gentle hand on her shoulder. She could not shake the sense that time was running short, that each passing day brought some dreadful inevitability closer. In the darkness, she reached for the bond she shared with Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal, reassuring herself that she was not alone in this quest. After many days, the horizon revealed a smudge of dark land against the gray sky. A sulfuric stench wafted across the water. Tyrigon's cradle was in sight. Closer they sailed, and Daenerys beheld a coastline made of jagged volcanic rock, black beaches, and towering spires that looked like the petrified claws of some ancient beast. Geysers spewed steam intermittently, and a dull red glow emanated from fissures in the ground. No vegetation graced the landscape, only ash and scorched rubble. As the dawn's glory found a half-sheltered cove to drop anchor, Daenerys watched her dragons circle overhead, scanning the terrain. She prayed silently to the Lord of Light, or perhaps only to the restless spirits of Valyria, that they would not find themselves walking into a death trap. The landing party set foot on the black sand, the grains crunching under their boots like shards of glass. The air was thick and humid, carrying the faint odor of brimstone. Grayish smoke drifted from vents in the ground, reminding Daenerys of the catacombs beneath Meereen. Missandei coughed into a cloth while the Unsullied marched in disciplined ranks. Ahead lay the scattered remains of what might have been walls or towers centuries ago. Only fragments of architecture remained, carved with faded glyphs that might have been Valyrian in origin. The place felt older than old Valyria, as if it had slumbered beneath the sea since the dawn of days. Drogon landed on a wide bluff, crushing ancient stones beneath his talons. Viserion and Rhaegal took up positions nearby, hissing uneasily. Daenerys approached Drogon, placing her hand on his scaled leg. He breathed loudly, each exhalation trembling with contained energy. Together, they moved inland. The heat beneath the soil radiated through the soles of Daenerys's boots, and sweat began to trickle down her brow. Pools of steaming water dotted the landscape, some bubbling with unknown chemicals. The terrain sloped upward, culminating in a rocky plateau overshadowed by a massive crag. From there, Daenerys could see the remains of what had once been a fortress. Part of it jutted out from the hillside, carved from obsidian-like stone. Massive steps led to a shattered entrance, flanked by crumbling statues with dragon-like features. The very atmosphere throbbed with tension, as though the land itself resented this intrusion. They advanced cautiously. The Unsullied fanned out, spears at the ready. The interior courtyard was open to the sky, strewn with rubble. In the center, a large pit gaped in the earth, its edges ringed with black stone. Steam rose from within, veiling the depths in shifting mists. To one side lay a pile of objects that made Daenerys' heart quicken. Elongated shapes half buried in ash, reminiscent of the eggs she had once received in Pentos. But these were bigger, some nearly the height of a grown man, shaped in black and red striations, marbled with gold or emerald veins. They pulsed with a faint warmth even from several steps away. At the sight, Drogon roared, a low guttural sound that echoed off the crumbling walls. The vibrations sent a thrill through Daenerys, as though her blood recognized these eggs. Yet a deep unease clawed at her as well. The eggs exuded an aura of menace, as if they were drenched in the power of a darker flame. Before she could approach them, a sudden shout went up from the Unsullied. The masked reavers had arrived. They emerged from hidden passages and behind heaps of rubble, clad in boiled leather dyed black. Ornate masks covered their faces, each decorated with stylized dragon motifs and swirling flames. Their leader wore a mask shaped like a skull, crowned with curved horns that gleamed with a crimson hue. They bore curved blades and short spears, each tipped with blackened steel. One of them lifted a horn to their mask, blowing a deep, resonant note that reverberated through the courtyard. Almost instantly, more of them poured in from the other side, surrounding Daenerys' party in a ring of death. Daenerys raised a hand. "Hold!" She stepped forward, her voice echoing. "I am Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, breaker of chains. This land does not belong to you. Who are you that dares to threaten my people?" A hush fell. The reavers parted, revealing a tall figure with eyes glinting behind slits in a horned mask. The figure spoke in a voice distorted by some unnatural resonance. "Mother of dragons," it hissed, "your flames burn bright, but the shadows burn brighter still. The Lord of Light has no dominion here. Our master claims these eggs. Our master claims this land. And you shall not pass." Daenerys felt Drogon's fury flare through their bond. Smoke curled from his nostrils as he stomped closer, tail lashing. The Reavers did not flinch, though some visibly trembled. They hissed in unison, a sound reminiscent of snakes. Then, with a collective cry, they charged. Swords clashed against unsullied spears, and the courtyard erupted in violence. Daenerys drew a slender blade of her own, though she was no great knight. The Unsullied formed a defensive circle around her and Missandei. She darted forward, slashing at one masked assailant who lunged too close. The clang of steel rang in her ears. She glimpsed bright blood spraying across the black stones, an unsettling contrast to the gloom. A shriek cut through the chaos as Viserion dove overhead, unleashing a torrent of white-hot flame. The Reavers scattered, but some stood their ground, chanting incantations that made Daenerys' skin crawl. It was as if they welcomed the dragon fire, arms raised in twisted devotion. Where flames licked their masks and armor, something unnatural happened. They burned, but not as flesh should. Their silhouettes seemed to flicker, as if the fire devoured something intangible within them. Then they collapsed, masks clattering to the ground. Others, however, flung spheres that cracked open, releasing plumes of black smoke. The dragons coughed, reeling back from the acrid fumes. Daenerys felt panic flicker. She had never seen anything that could drive dragons away with mere smoke. Perhaps these Reavers were armed with arcane knowledge gleaned from old Valyria or the darker corners of Essos. Rhaegal landed among them with a thunderous crash, scattering bodies like leaves. He snapped at the masked warriors, crushing one in his jaws. Another jabbed a spear at his flank, drawing sizzling dragon blood that hissed upon the stone. Rhaegal roared in pain, blasting the attacker with emerald flames that left only charred bone. All the while, Drogon circled above, waiting for his moment to strike. Daenerys felt him seething, his wrath building to a crescendo. The tall leader raised a staff carved with runes, chanting in a harsh, unknown tongue. The black smoke thickened, swirling around the battlefield. Lightning flickered overhead, though there was no storm. Daenerys heard words that reminded her of her dreams, references to shadows, to a god of darkness in conflict with the Lord of Light. She remembered Melisandre's warnings about the great other, Lawlor's eternal foe. Could these Reavers be servants of that dark deity, seeking to corrupt or claim the latent power of dragons for themselves? A flash of movement drew Daenerys' attention. One of the Reavers vaulted over the rubble, heading straight for Missandei. Daenerys lunged, but the masked warrior was quicker, blade raised. Missandei shrank back, eyes wide with terror. Daenerys snarled and slashed with all her might. Her sword cut deep into the Reaver's side, throwing off their aim. The blade meant for Missandei scraped her shoulder instead of her throat, drawing a crimson line but not a mortal wound. Missandei cried out, stumbling back. The Reaver staggered, black blood pooling around them, and collapsed. "Missandei!" Daenerys shouted, dropping to a knee beside her friend. Her hand came away bloody where she grasped Missandei's arm. The wound seeped quickly, but Missandei still breathed, clutching Daenerys' hand with trembling fingers. Daenerys' chest tightened. She had sworn to protect her, and now Missandei was hurt. Another wave of Reavers closed in, but the Unsullied pressed them back. Overhead, Drogon finally unleashed his fury. He dived, jaws parted. A column of scarlet fire engulfed the courtyard, incinerating a score of enemies in a single pass. The heat struck Daenerys like a physical force, nearly knocking her off balance. She shielded Missandei's body as best she could, trusting the dragon's flames to spare her. When the torrent ceased, the Reavers lay scattered, many reduced to smoldering husks. Only their leader remained standing, protected by a whirling vortex of darkness. The figure raised the staff, chanting louder, the unnatural voice echoing off the walls. The air crackled with energy, and for a moment Daenerys feared that even Drogon's flame would not suffice. But she saw Drogon bank around, shimmering with an almost golden aura that reminded her of the dream. Something about him glowed with the heat of the Lord of Light. She felt a warmth in her chest that was neither fear nor adrenaline. It was the feeling of Lawlor's flame guiding her, sustaining her. She pressed Missandei's hand to reassure her friend, then rose to her feet, sword in hand. She shouted at Drogon through their wordless bond. He answered with a thunderous roar, diving again. The Reaver leader thrust the staff skyward, conjuring a swirl of black mist that sought to repel the dragon's approach. But Drogon was unstoppable now. His flames burned a bright gold and they pierced the barrier of darkness like the sun-piercing storm clouds. A horrific screech filled the courtyard as the vortex shattered and the masked leader stumbled back. Drogon's claws crushed the staff in an explosion of splinters. Then, with a swift snap of his jaws, he seized the Reaver leader in his mouth. Daenerys could only watch, breathless, as Drogon swallowed the wretched foe in a display of draconic might. All that remained was the echo of a dying shriek. Silence settled, broken only by the crackle of dying flames and the ragged breaths of the survivors. The black smoke dissipated, revealing a courtyard littered with bodies, both Reaver and unsullied. Daenerys rushed to Missandei's side. The wound was bleeding, but not too profusely. She called for one of the knights who knew basic healing. Carefully, they bandaged Missandei's shoulder. "You'll live," Daenerys whispered, relief flooding her voice. Missandei nodded, grimacing. "Thank you," she said. Tears streaked her cheeks, but she managed a brave smile. Daenerys embraced her gently, then stood to survey the carnage. The air reeked of burnt flesh and sulfur. Many of the eggs lay scattered amidst the rubble, cracked or broken by the force of Drogon's onslaught. But a few remained intact. Daenerys approached one that glistened like polished obsidian veined with gold. It was warm to the touch. She felt a strange pulse within, as though a heart beat there. Yet it was not the comforting resonance she'd felt with her own dragon's eggs long ago. This was an altogether darker, more alien presence, as if something ancient and malevolent slumbered within. She withdrew her hand, unsettled. She spoke quietly to the unsullied. "Gather the eggs that remain intact. But handle them carefully, use thick blankets or sacks, and do not touch them directly. Bring them back to the ship. We cannot leave them here, lest they fall into the wrong hands." The men obeyed at once, working with efficient speed. Meanwhile, Daenerys gazed down into the steaming pit at the courtyard's center. A faint glow emanated from far below, like the fires of some underground forge. She had a sense that the old fortress was only partly explored, that deeper chambers lay beneath. Even so, she was uncertain she wanted to delve further, not with Missandei wounded and the possibility of more Reavers lurking. The dark storm conjured by the leader had disintegrated with his death, but a tangible aura of dread lingered. Viserion and Regal perched on broken walls, letting out cautious croons. Drogon loomed above them, wings partially spread in a protective stance. "My children," Daenerys murmured, gazing upon them with gratitude. In that moment, she saw something flicker across Drogon's eyes, a spark of recognition, as though he were channeling a presence far older than himself. She recalled the dream again of that figure of light speaking in visions. Somehow, the bond between her and Drogon had deepened, entwining with the fiery presence of Lawler. Could the Lord of Light truly be working through her greatest dragon? Or was Drogon himself the Lord of Light incarnate in scaled form, an incarnation of flame and prophecy? The thought almost robbed her of breath. She recalled legends about Valyrian sorcerers forging bonds between dragons and strange gods of the flame. Had she unwittingly revived something that had once slumbered for centuries? For now, she set aside her questions. The living needed her. They carried the wounded, both unsullied and a few knights, back to the ships, along with the unbroken eggs. The cost of the battle weighed heavily on Daenerys' heart, but she knew it could have been far worse without the dragons. She vowed that those who fell would be honored with rites worthy of heroes. By the time they returned to the dawn's glory, the sun hung low in the sky, staining the horizon a deep crimson. The ship's crew gaped in horror at the injuries and the battered state of the landing party, but they obeyed orders quickly, hoisting sails and readying to depart. Many glanced nervously at the cluster of enormous eggs placed carefully in the hold, half expecting them to burst open at any moment. Daenerys stood on the deck, watching Tyrigon's cradle recede into the dusk. In the distance, she saw strange shapes moving along the shoreline, possibly more Reavers or beasts that lurked among the ruins. A sense of dread mingled with triumph. She had come to discover new dragons, and she had found them of a sort. Yet these eggs radiated a darkness that made her uneasy. Could they be cleansed or awakened in a way that served the light rather than the shadows? Or were they irredeemably tainted by the Great Other's influence? She wished she had the counsel of a Red Priest or Priestess. Though she knew some of the faithful in Meereen, none possessed the knowledge or power to interpret such mysteries. Still, the dream burned in her memory. Perhaps she was meant to be the one who would shape these new dragons, forging them into instruments of liberation rather than fear. The journey back was slightly less perilous. No storms assailed them with the fury of the outbound voyage, though the sea remained restless. Daenerys spent hours at Missandei's side, applying salves and tending her wound, grateful each time she found her friend a little stronger. At night, her dreams were calmer but still laced with flickers of prophetic imagery. Drogon wreathed in golden flame, the mysterious eggs cracking to reveal creatures of pale hide and fiery hearts, an army of shadows rising to meet them. She tried to glean sense from these fleeting visions. Each time she awoke, the question beat in her mind, what role had the Lord of Light decreed for her in this great cosmic struggle? They arrived at Meereen's harbor to a tense reception. The Freedman's shield had repelled several raids in Daenerys' absence, though the city stood firm. Grey Worm and her loyal advisors came to greet her on the docks, relief plain in their eyes. At once, they noticed her exhausted appearance and the wagon bearing large, cloth-wrapped shapes. The murmurs of onlookers rose like a tide as word spread that the queen had returned with new dragon eggs. Some cheered, while others looked pale with apprehension. Daenerys ordered the eggs taken into secure storage within the pyramid's lower chambers, guarded day and night by the best Unsullied. She would not risk them falling into unscrupulous hands. Inside the Great Pyramid, Daenerys convened her inner circle. Grey Worm reported on the raids. The masked riders had grown bolder, attacking caravans closer to the city walls, but always slipping away before the Freedman's shield could capture them. Among the recovered corpses of these raiders, some bore the same dread sigils that Daenerys had seen on Drogon's cradle. A coiling, serpent-like dragon shape surmounted by a black sun. It seemed the threat was linked to that island more intimately than she'd realized. Even if she'd killed their leader there, new chieftains might be rising to replace him. She then recounted her own experiences on the island, describing the swirling black smoke, the masked leader who could conjure shadowy magic, and the massive eggs they had retrieved. When she spoke of Drogon's flames piercing the darkness as though blessed by a divine presence, the Meereenese nobles shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. Some looked skeptical, while others showed quiet fascination. Missandei, pale from her injury but resolved, stated firmly, "I saw it with my own eyes. It was as if Drogon shone with the light of 100 torches." The conversation turned to the question of what should be done with the eggs. Some argued they should be destroyed to prevent monstrous dragons from hatching into potential horrors. Others insisted they could be a source of great power if tamed and hatched under Daenerys' guidance. The debate grew heated, but Daenerys eventually raised a hand. "We cannot act in haste. The eggs are dangerous, but they may also be salvation if we can purify them of whatever dark magic clings to them. I will not condemn them to destruction, not yet. They are children, in a sense, as were Drogon, Viserion, and Regal once. We must not let our fear override possibility. But I will lock them away in the vault beneath the pyramid, guarded at all times. No one will approach them without my express leave." With that decision, the council disbanded, though unease lingered in every corner. Daenerys spent the next days tending to her city, reassuring the populace that she remained their protector. She walked among the wounded, paying respects to families who had lost loved ones in the raids. And she spoke privately with Missandei, whose wound was healing slowly. Missandei confided that during the brief moment the Reaver's blade had cut her, she felt a presence, cold as death, brush against her mind. She had seen a vision of dragons devouring the sun, and shadowy silhouettes dancing in the darkness. Her account rattled Daenerys, adding another layer of urgency to the problem at hand. If the great other servants were creeping into Essos, they might see Daenerys' dragons as either a threat to be destroyed or a power to be perverted for their own ends. Amidst these worries, a visitor arrived, a red priest from Volantis named Kezer. He was a tall, spare man with a smooth head and a deep, resonant voice. Clad in red robes embroidered with the emblem of a burning heart, he claimed to have been guided by visions of the Mother of Dragons and a growing darkness in the east. He bowed low before Daenerys, calling her "she who walks in flame" and praising her as R'hlloreth's chosen instrument. Though Daenerys accepted him courteously, she regarded him with caution. She had learned to be wary of those who placed undue faith in prophecy. Yet she could not ignore the possibility that he carried knowledge that might help her understand the eggs and the illusions of the Great Other. In a private meeting, Kezer examined the eggs under tight security. He murmured prayers in the High Valyrian dialect used by certain red priests, sprinkled them with salts, and pressed a ruby amulet against their scorching surfaces. He looked pale when he finished. "These eggs are not wholly the creation of the Great Other," he pronounced, "but they have been touched by that foul power. They lie in a state between life and death, waiting for a spark to awaken them. Yet that spark could be of R'hllor as well. If the Lord of Light's flame ignites these eggs first, they may hatch dragons of the pure flame. If the darkness stirs them first, they will become abominations. The conflict is delicate, and the time grows short." Daenerys's heart pounded. "What must be done?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. "A ritual of purification, in which the queen who was reborn in fire must become the vessel of R'hllor's flame. Only you can tip the balance, Daenerys Targaryen. For your blood and your dragon's blood are intertwined, and you have already shown the world that fire cannot harm you. But the risk is great. If the ritual fails, the eggs may hatch monstrous spawn that serve only shadow, and you yourself may be consumed." She thought of her old memories, stepping into Khal Drogo's funeral pyre, emerging unharmed, dragons curled upon her body. Fire had been her ally once. Could she harness it again? She felt Drogon's presence at the edge of her mind, a comforting warmth that steadied her nerves. Even Viserion and R'hllor stirred somewhere above, roosting on the pyramid's heights, as if they, too, felt her tension. "I will do what must be done," she said. "But first I must deal with the threat of these raiders. We cannot allow them to terrorize the land any longer. If these reavers truly served the Great Other, their power might grow if left unchecked." Khazar inclined his head gravely. "Then I will prepare for the ritual in the meantime. When you return, it must be done soon. Darkness gathers swiftly." True to her word, Daenerys spent the next fortnight driving back the masked raiders. Coordinating with Grey Worm, she dispatched well-organized patrols supported by her dragons. Viserion and R'hllor learned to adapt to the raiders' smoke bombs, avoiding the fumes with cunning aerial maneuvers. Together, they scoured the coastal villages, ambushing the reavers' camps and liberating captives. The people of Essos witnessed Daenerys herself riding Drogon, a queen in gleaming armor, hair billowing in the wind, brandishing the Targaryen banner. Many bowed in awe while the raiders cowered in fear. In several pitched battles, Drogon unleashed golden fire that seemed immune to the reavers' dark sorceries, incinerating their warbands. Word spread that the Lord of Light favored Daenerys, and in time, the reavers' once bold attacks waned to scattered skirmishes. The Great Other's servants slithered back into the shadows, wounded but not annihilated. At last, Daenerys returned to Meereen, triumphant though weary. She felt both satisfaction and an undercurrent of dread. She knew she had only bought time. The final test lay in the purification of the eggs. If she succeeded, perhaps she would gain powerful allies, new dragons to guard Essos against any further infiltration of darkness. If she failed, she might unleash horrors worse than anything the region had yet seen. The thought kept her awake at night, staring at the flicker of an oil lamp in her private chamber, Missandei sleeping fitfully nearby. The night of the ritual came. The moon hung low and full in the sky, bathing Meereen in a ghostly glow. Khazar chose an open courtyard within the Great Pyramid, one that had once been used for grand feasts. At its center, he arranged a circular pit lined with logs soaked in aromatic oils. The 3 eggs were placed on a low platform, spaced evenly. Daenerys recalled the night she'd hatched Drogon, Viserion, and R'hllor, how she had placed the eggs upon Drogo's pyre, stepping into the flames herself. Would this night end the same way, or differently? Missandei stood to one side, her shoulder still bandaged but her eyes fierce with loyalty. Grey Worm, the Unsullied, and a few Meereenese nobles formed a solemn ring, all sworn to keep onlookers at a distance. She was grateful for their presence. She would need every prayer for success. Her dragons perched on the surrounding walls, keenly attentive. They seemed to sense the significance of this moment. Drogon was especially restless, scraping his talons on the stone, releasing short bursts of flame that danced in the gloom. Khazar poured a circle of salt around the platform and began chanting in High Valyrian, calling upon R'hllor to banish all shadows, to fill the night with holy light. The air stirred with energy, a vibration that made the hair on Daenerys' arms stand on end. At last, Khazar signaled for Daenerys to step forward. She wore a simple garment of thin cloth that could burn away easily, as she had worn on the night she had walked into Drogo's pyre. She felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, but she focused on the memory of warmth that fire had given her once. Slowly, she approached the eggs, one black with gold veins, another black with red veins, and the third black with shimmering green. They seemed more ominous than the ones she had hatched long ago, as though they harbored an uneasy mix of potential. She placed her palms upon them, feeling the searing heat that pulsed beneath. She could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Kezer tossed a torch into the pit of logs, and flames roared up instantly, fed by the oils. Daenerys stood in the center, letting the fire lap at her legs. The onlookers gasped as the flames rose higher, dancing around her silhouette. She closed her eyes, summoning the memory of that night when she had felt no pain, only the call of the dragon. In her mind, she recalled the visions of Drogon lit by a holy flame, the whispers of the Lord of Light, the paternal warmth that had once enveloped her in the pyre. She opened her lips and mouthed a single phrase, Dracarys. The word was more than a command to the dragons, it was a command to the fire itself, to live, to burn, to become. Drogon roared from the edge of the courtyard. His jaws parted, and a stream of golden flame engulfed Daenerys and the eggs, merging with the fire of the pyre. The intensity was staggering, but Daenerys did not flinch. She surrendered to the inferno, trusting the bond she shared with flame. The roar of the blaze filled her senses, drowning out all else. Sweat poured down her face, but she felt no agony. The cloth on her body scorched away, leaving her naked among the flames, yet she remained unburnt. The eggs glowed white-hot, cracking and shuddering with the force of their awakening. She sensed an internal battle, a swirl of opposing forces. One felt like a gentle warmth, the other a cold so profound it threatened to steal her breath. Her own inner fire pushed back at the chill, channeling R'hllor's might in a contest of wills. Her mind drifted as though carried on a tide of molten light. She saw shapes forming within each egg, serpentine figures that struggled to be born. One was wreathed in black vapors, the other shimmered with radiant sparks. She poured every ounce of her resolve into turning those sparks into flame, banishing the darkness that coiled around them. In her trance, she thought she glimpsed a regal silhouette, crowned with flame, a presence that laid a hand upon her shoulder and smiled. The presence whispered, "You are fire made flesh, Daenerys Stormborn. Let my light guide you." With that, the black vapors thinned, dissolving as if a wind of pure light swept them away. She opened her eyes to see the eggs splitting open. Charred shells fell aside, and 3 new hatchlings emerged onto the scorching platform. They were small and fragile, mewling softly as steam rose from their glistening scales. Each was predominantly black, but lines of color traced their ridges. Gold for one, red for the second, green for the third. The crowd gasped. The hatchlings blinked at the flames, their eyes reflecting the firelight with uncanny brilliance. As Daenerys knelt, the flames parting around her like a living curtain, the 3 creatures stretched their necks toward her. She could sense a bond forming, albeit tenuous and uncertain, as if they were testing her claim over them. She extended a trembling hand, letting them sniff her skin. They made small chirping sounds, uncertain but not hostile. Then the largest of the 3, the one veined with gold, stepped forward and nuzzled her palm with a scaled snout. Cheers erupted from those who watched, though they stood at a respectful distance from the blazing pyre. Daenerys felt relief, joy, and a measure of awe. She had done it, hatched new dragons, purified of the great other's touch. Yet her legs nearly buckled from the strain. The hatchlings wobbled, trying to balance on unsteady limbs. The flames began to die down, revealing the new brood for all to see. Kezer, sweat streaming down his brow, fell to his knees, chanting prayers of thanksgiving to R'hllor. Drogon landed with an earth-shaking thud, gazing upon the tiny dragons with a mixture of curiosity and protectiveness. Viserion and Regal joined him, hissing softly as if greeting their newborn siblings. Missandei rushed forward, draping a cloak around Daenerys' shoulders. "You did it," she whispered, awe shining in her eyes. Daenerys cradled the hatchling in her hands, regarding its delicate wings and needle-like claws. A tear slipped down her cheek, unheeded. She thought of everything she had endured, the betrayals, the challenges, the heartbreak. And here she was, once again the mother of dragons, forging a new era. Yet behind her elation lurked a shadow of concern. These little ones carried within them the echoes of that dark island. Purified they might be, but she knew it would take careful guidance to ensure they grew into protectors rather than terrors. Still, the presence of R'hllor felt strong, as if the Lord of Light himself had blessed this outcome. She stood, waves of heat and exhaustion coursing through her body. Grey Worm helped her step from the remaining embers of the pyre. The Unsullied formed a careful ring around the hatchlings, ensuring they did not wander too far or become startled by the throng of watchers. Daenerys's old dragons roared in unison, a deafening salute that shook the night. Many in attendance fell to their knees, dazzled by the spectacle. She could almost sense the swirling tide of faith rising among them, the stories they would tell of how their queen once again emerged from flame, unscathed, bearing new dragons as a sign of divine favor. In the days that followed, Daenerys allowed herself a brief respite to recover from the physical toll of the ritual. The new hatchlings were housed in a specially prepared enclosure adjoining the Great Pyramid, kept warm by braziers and occasionally visited by the older dragons. They appeared healthy, each with distinct personalities emerging. The gold-veined one was the boldest, snapping playfully at the older siblings. The red-veined one was temperamental, prone to sudden bursts of flame that singed the walls. The green-veined one was quieter, observing the world with almost unnerving intelligence. Daenerys spent hours among them, letting them grow accustomed to her presence. She fed them morsels of scorched meat, speaking softly in Valyrian. They had to learn that she was their mother, their protector, and their guiding hand. But even as hope blossomed, new challenges lurked. The masked reavers had been driven back, yet not destroyed. Disturbing reports persisted of robed figures congregating in secret places, chanting in the night. Some whispered that the Great Other's worshippers would not give up the eggs so easily, that they would seek to corrupt these hatchlings if given the chance. Kezer warned that the Great Other's influence was not limited to a single island or warband. The war between fire and shadow was eternal, fought on many fronts. This was but one skirmish in a conflict that stretched across continents and centuries. Daenerys considered her position carefully. The vow she had made to herself was clear: she would not abandon Essos to the horrors of enslavement or the creeping shadow of darkness. The people here had chosen her, just as she had chosen them. This was her place, at least for now. She would strengthen her rule, forge alliances with neighboring cities, and root out any lingering cells of the masked raiders. Her dragons, old and new, would help safeguard these lands. And in time, perhaps, the day would come when she would look west again, to the Iron Throne. But the call of prophecy no longer dictated her path, her own heart did. She was the Dragon Queen, guided by light, forging her own destiny in a land that had become her home. So it was that Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, chose to stay in Essos. Many would say she did so because the Lord of Light beckoned her to unite flame and freedom in this tumultuous continent. Others would claim she stayed because she believed in her cause so deeply that no mere throne, no matter how gilded or storied, could compare to the salvation she offered the downtrodden. In truth, it was all these reasons and more. For though her heart yearned to break the wheel that ground the poor into dust, she also felt the mysteries of the Red God coursing in her veins. The nights were alive with portents, the days brimming with challenges, and through it all, Drogon soared above Meereen's spires, mightier even than Balerion of old, a living herald of her resolve. Viserion and Regal, undiminished by any mortal blow, flanked their brother in the skies, roaring a triumphant chorus that proclaimed their bond unbroken. And in the shelter of her care, 3 new dragons, the golden, the red, and the green, found their first glimpses of sunlight and freedom. Though darkness still whispered in distant corners, Daenerys knew she had kindled a light that would not be easily snuffed out. She had felt the Great Other's chill but stood unburnt by it, her faith in life's flame unshaken. Even as rumors abounded of fresh dragon sightings across the seas, even as old foes in distant lands plotted her downfall, she rose each morning to a city reclaimed from nightmares, shaped by her courage, defended by her living fire. The world had changed the day she walked into fire and birthed dragons. It had changed again when she commanded that same flame to banish the shadows from Tyrigon's cradle. And it would change yet more as she continued to grow into the queen she was meant to be, a queen who had chosen Essos not from weakness, but from compassion and from the knowledge that her true strength came not only from dragons or prophecy, but from the love of the people whose chains she had shattered. So she stood on the Great Pyramid's terrace, gazing at the city that had become a tapestry of cultures and hopes, her silver-gold hair whipped by the wind. Drogon circled overhead, casting a vast shadow across the rooftops, a reminder that she was never alone. She felt the faint stirring in her mind that connected her to her dragons, old and young alike. She sensed in that bond an echo of the divine flame that had guarded her steps. Perhaps Lawler had indeed chosen her, or perhaps she had simply chosen herself. In the end, it mattered little. She was Daenerys Stormborn, mother of dragons, breaker of chains, and Essos was her kingdom for as long as she willed it so. Far away in the west lay the 7 kingdoms and an iron throne that once belonged to her ancestors. But here, in the heat and dust, in the laughter of freed children, in the roar of dragons that soared freely, she had forged a destiny all her own, a destiny that glowed with the bright promise of a better world, lit by the unconquerable fire within her soul. Daenerys Targaryen rose before dawn on the terrace of the Great Pyramid, drawn by the hush of the sleeping city and the faint glimmer of stars above. Her shift fluttered about her ankles in a gentle breeze. Though she had governed Meereen for some time now, the marvel of the city at night still captured her, the domed roofs, the winding streets, the sprawl of dwellings that clung to every slope. They looked delicate as parchment, illuminated by faint lanterns. Yet beneath that tranquil view she sensed the simmering energies of a place both vibrant and fractious, a city that had once been enslaved, brutalized, and only recently reclaimed by the freed. In the distance, the horizon remained dark, the sky a velvet tapestry pricked with small lights. She inhaled slowly, feeling the swirl of possibility and tension. The new dragons were resting somewhere below in carefully guarded enclosures, while Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal sprawled across the upper terraces, half-dozing in watchful repose. She traced her fingers along the stone balustrade, recalling all that had transpired since she made the choice to remain in Essos. It would be a lie to say she never thought of Westeros anymore. She did, sometimes, in dreams and in moments of stillness when the ghosts of her lineage stirred. But her heart now lay with these liberated people, with this land that embraced both splendor and suffering. She was forging a new legacy here, not the one some fanatics of House Targaryen might have wished for, but a living, breathing reality shaped by the flames of her own trials. Each dawn, she reminded herself that she was fighting for those who had no other champion. She was not merely a conqueror, not merely a Targaryen bent on regaining an ancestral throne. She was Daenerys, breaker of chains, mother of dragons, and unwilling to watch Essos descend once more into tyranny and despair. Below, in the courtyard that served as a training yard for the Freedman's Shield, she saw the flicker of torchlight moving between the neat rows of barracks. The Freedman's Shield had become an official standing force composed of volunteers who had once been slaves and who now strove to defend their hard-won freedom. Grey Worm and the Unsullied had provided discipline and structure to these ranks, forging them into an army. Morale was high, but so were rumors of scattered pockets of raiders, mystics of the Great Other, and slaver families who had slipped away in the tumult of Daenerys' ascension. She knew they lurked like scorpions under rocks, waiting to strike whenever her attention was divided. Word of her newly hatched dragons had only increased the curiosity and envy of potential foes. Power attracted challengers as surely as rotting meat drew flies. She turned and glanced over her shoulder at a low growl behind her. Drogon lay curled against one of the massive pillars, half in shadow. His ebony scales shone with a subtle sheen, his horn curving back in lethal crescents. Even in repose, he exuded an otherworldly menace, and yet his eyes, partially open, regarded Daenerys with a warmth that always stirred her soul. He had grown larger than she once imagined possible. Some in Meereen whispered he had surpassed Balerion, the Black Dread of Targaryen legend. Daenerys could not say for certain. She had no living measure for Balerion, only old songs and stories. But each time she gazed upon Drogon's immense wingspan, each time she heard the thunder of his roar, she believed those whispers. And in the quiet times, she felt something else flowing through him. An aura of fire that went beyond mortal comprehension, as though Lawler, the Lord of Light, was truly threaded through his very bones. It went deeper than magic or prophecy. It was primordial, like the heartbeat of the earth. She had glimpsed it during the battle on Tyrigon's cradle, when his flames burned a fierce gold that shredded the darkness conjured by that masked priest. She had felt it again when she hatched the new dragons, stepping into the purifying fire. She closed her eyes, letting herself sink into that memory. The swirling flames, her bare feet amid the wood and oil, her hands cradling those tainted eggs as she prayed for a cleansing light to burn away the Great Other's mark. She had emerged unscathed, the shells splitting open, new life finding its voice in that inferno. The memory still made her tremble with awe. The hatchlings lived now under constant watch. They had grown swiftly in a matter of weeks, devouring meat at an astonishing pace, playful yet easily startled. Each displayed unique traits. The gold-veined one hissed and lunged at shadows. The red-veined one tested its flame breath on unsuspecting corners of its enclosure, and the green-veined one slunk about with disquieting silence, inquisitive eyes ever watchful. A bond tugged at Daenerys' mind when she approached them, though it was not as strong or immediate as the connection she felt to Drogon, Viserion, and Regal. Perhaps that bond would deepen in time, or perhaps these new dragons would always be touched by a different flame. In any case, she took her role of caretaker seriously, determined to guide them toward grace rather than destruction. Movement in the courtyard drew her focus once more. A figure approached, robes of scarlet billowing in the lantern light. She recognized Kezer, the red priest from Volantis who had aided her in the ritual. He carried a tall staff topped with a piece of polished obsidian, said to serve as a focus for his prayers. Daenerys watched him exchange a few words with the freedmen's shield guards, then turn up the steps toward the pyramid's higher levels. She knew he wanted to speak with her. Almost every day he brought new tidings, new interpretations of omens, new warnings. Sometimes she welcomed his counsel, but other times it felt like a weight on her shoulders. Prophecy had a way of devouring hope, if one let it. She waited as his footsteps drew nearer, echoing softly across the polished floors. Drogon lifted his head as if in acknowledgement, but did not rise. "Your Grace," Kezer said, bowing low. His shaved scalp gleamed in the soft torchlight. "I beg pardon for disturbing you at this early hour, but we have received urgent word from the outskirts of Laser. A caravan arrived with refugees who claim that black-robed figures have begun terrorizing villages near the Painted Mountains. They speak of horrifying rituals in the dead of night, sacrifices made to a dark deity. These refugees say the worshippers brandish a symbol that strongly resembles the mark of the Great Other. I believe the shadows you battled at Tiragon's cradle are not vanquished. They multiply in the east." Daenerys felt a cold wave of dread at this news. She remembered how the masked raiders terrorized the coast, how they spat curses and summoned black smoke that repelled even the flame of lesser dragons. Only Drogon's golden fury and later the purifying might of Lollarest's presence had finally broken their main force on that accursed isle. Now it seemed remnants or offshoots had spread inland, gathering in hidden places. She straightened, folding her arms. "Have our scouts verified this? Do we know if they command an army?" Kezer shook his head. "The accounts are fragmented. These are scattered refugees from multiple villages, each telling a similar story, riders in black masks and robes chanting in a language that is not Giscari or Valyrian. Some claim the riders have monstrous creatures with them, lithe beasts that might be half-wyverns or something else entirely, never seen clearly but glimpsed as pale shapes gliding through the sky at night. The refugees say entire hamlets have vanished, their people taken or slaughtered. If these cultists are indeed in league with the Great Other, they may be preparing fresh horrors. They might even be seeking dragon eggs or some twisted ritual to corrupt living dragons." Daenerys set her jaw. Another challenge, another place in Essos where terror reared its head. Yet she could not be everywhere at once, nor could her dragons. The freedman's shield was strong around Meereen and the coastal areas, but Laser was far inland, past rolling hills and wide plains. It would require a well-coordinated expedition, or else a demonstration of force that could break the cult before it gained momentum. She knew that if she left such a threat to fester, it might grow into an inferno, one that threatened not only Laser but also Meereen's trade routes and beyond. "Thank you, Kezer," she said, motioning for him to join her at the balustrade. She spoke quietly, though the courtyard was largely empty. "I have half a mind to lead an army there myself, but my responsibilities to Meereen remain pressing. Even with the freedman's shield in place, I cannot simply abandon the city. If these are truly worshippers of the Great Other, they may be seeking an opening, hoping to lure me away. Another possibility is that slavers or mercenary lords have allied with these dark priests. Such alliances have been made before, especially by those who crave wealth or power at any cost." Kezer nodded gravely. "The darkness is cunning. It wears many faces and walks many roads. Sometimes it offers power to those who desire it beyond reason. Sometimes it thrives on fear alone. But know this, Lollarest's flame burns strongest where it is wielded by those with true conviction. You have proven your willingness to stand against shadows. That is not lost on your foes." A hush stretched between them, broken only by the low rumble from Drogon's throat. Daenerys weighed her options. She could dispatch a contingent of the freedman's shield and Unsullied, perhaps accompanied by one or two of her older dragons. But the new hatchlings were still too fragile to risk, and Drogon's presence was too valuable near Meereen. If shadows of the Great Other threatened to the southeast, Who was to say an equal or greater threat wouldn't rise from the west while she was gone? Yet if she did nothing, entire swaths of laser might be lost. She closed her eyes, recalling her vow never to abandon the innocent. She looked at Kezer, reading the sincerity in his dark eyes. Then we must do something. I will muster a force, a swift strike to disrupt these cultists. I cannot lead it personally. Meereen cannot be left rudderless for so long, but I can send Regal along with my knights and a large contingent of Freedman's Shield, commanded by someone I trust. Regal's fire will be a warning to any who would spread darkness in my domain. And you, Kezer, would you go? Your knowledge of the great other's rights might prove invaluable. He knelt without hesitation. It would be my honor and duty, your grace. My staff and I shall accompany your army. Regal's flames will be a beacon of R'hlloreth's might. I pray the sight of a dragon soaring overhead will hearten the innocent to stand firm against terror. Daenerys bade him rise and placed a hand on his shoulder. Then it is settled. Gather your priests. We march at first light tomorrow. Grey Worm and I will see to the men. Go with caution and cunning. Do not let confidence blind you. We've seen what these shadow worshippers can do. Kezer nodded and took his leave, staff tapping lightly on the stones as he departed. Daenerys lingered, watching the last stars fade into the pale glow of approaching dawn. The thought of Regal flying so far without her brought a pang of concern to her chest. Though the bond they shared was not as ferocious and intimate as the one she shared with Drogon, she still loved Regal dearly and did not relish sending him into unknown dangers. Yet she knew he would relish the freedom to burn any threat that plagued the land. As for Drogon, she sensed he would never let her go far from him again. He guarded her as resolutely as if he believed the entire cause of the Lord of Light rested upon her survival. Perhaps it did. She smoothed her hand over his nearest flank, feeling the thrum of energy beneath his scales, and whispered a silent prayer for Regal's success. By sunrise, the pyramid bustled with activity. Grey Worm had already begun selecting veterans from the Freedman's Shield, men and women accustomed to quick deployments and skilled with spear and sword. The Unsullied volunteered eagerly, though Daenerys limited their number, mindful that Meereen still needed a strong defense. She assembled a command staff, a pair of Westerosi knights who had pledged loyalty to her during her early conquests in Slaver's Bay, a seasoned Meereenese captain who knew the roads to Laser intimately, and a Dothraki widow who had embraced Daenerys' cause and shown remarkable bravery in battle. Kezer joined them, solemn and reserved, a stark contrast to the martial vigor around him. He wore simple red robes, carrying only his staff, but Daenerys knew his power might be the key to outmaneuvering the cultists' shadowy arts. She stood in the main courtyard, watching the soldiers form ranks. Missandei hovered nearby, her injured shoulder nearly healed, but still wrapped in gauze beneath her garments. She offered words of encouragement to the Freedman's Shield, reminding them that they fought for their own freedom, for their families, and for the ideals Daenerys had introduced. Many of the recruits glanced anxiously at the sky, waiting for Regal's arrival. There was always a thrill in the air when a dragon prepared to join a column on the march. The dark shape of Regal soon appeared above, wings outstretched in the morning light, emerald scales shimmering under the sun. He descended, stirring dust and grit across the courtyard, bellowing a greeting. Even from a distance, Daenerys heard his guttural cry, and her heart lifted. She knew that to most, the appearance of a dragon still embodied equal parts wonder and fear. Yet she had grown so accustomed to their presence that it felt like greeting a dear friend. Regal swung his horned head around, searching the ranks, and Daenerys stepped forward to run a hand along his jaw. He responded with a low rumble that vibrated through her bones. "Thank you, my sweet one," she murmured, pressing her forehead to his rough scales. "Keep them safe. Burn any abomination you find out there." Regal nudged her gently, as if to say he understood, before turning his gaze to the soldiers with a swish of his spined tail. The Freedman's Shield parted to give him space. Grey Worm's voice rang out, calling men to order. The knights saluted Daenerys, and Kezer inclined his head respectfully. Then, with a grand sweep of his wings, Regal flapped up to circle overhead as the column began to march. Trumpets sounded from the city walls. Spectators gathered to watch them depart, some shouting blessings in the name of their dragon queen. Daenerys inhaled deeply, sadness and pride mingling in her chest. She hated to send them into harm's way, but she would do what was necessary to protect her people. When the echo of marching feet and the dragon's roar faded into the distance, she turned back to her responsibilities. She spent much of the day meeting with magistrates, receiving tributes from neighboring towns, and hearing petitioners in the throne room. These tasks could be tedious, yet she approached each one with the determination of someone who had once been powerless herself. She recognized that if she neglected the minutiae of governance, her city could unravel from within. Even as she signed edicts ensuring fair trade regulations and disputes over farmland, her thoughts drifted to Laser and the threat of black-robed cultists. She wondered how many times she would have to quell these dark seeds before the Great Other's servants finally gave up. Or perhaps they never would, and this was the beginning of a lifelong war against shadows. Her council meeting that evening carried a heavy tone. Grey Worm remained behind to oversee the Freedmen's Shield still stationed in Meereen, but was restless at not being part of the expedition. Missandei offered her perspective on trade disruptions. Caravans from Karth had reported rumors of fresh piracy in the Jade Sea. Several Meereenese merchants claimed that galleons sailing under false flags had plundered goods bound for the city, leaving behind cryptic messages scrawled in a language no one recognized. Ser Geron, one of the knights sworn to her, wondered if the black-robed cultists in Laser were connected to these pirates. Even if the direct link seemed tenuous, an undercurrent of tension gripped the region. Daenerys's gaze strayed to the windows beyond which the sky darkened into twilight. Her mind replayed everything, from her earliest days as a frightened girl sold to Khal Drogo to the moment she hatched her first 3 dragons to the day she claimed Meereen. Now, the city looked to her as more than a queen. She was almost a symbol of deliverance. And yet, deliverance was not a single act, but an ongoing promise she had to fulfill every day. After the council rose, she stepped outside to find Drogon perched on a broad ledge overlooking the street. His golden eyes reflected torchlight, giving him an almost regal glow. She placed a hand on his flank, feeling the heat of him. Sometimes words formed on her lips, silent prayers to Lawler to bless her dragons, to guide her. She was never certain if such prayers were truly answered or if she and Drogon simply drew upon each other's strength. Either way, it comforted her. She decided to visit the young hatchlings before retiring for the night. Deep in the pyramid's lower levels, an enclosure had been fashioned. Thick stone walls, a domed ceiling with vents for fresh air and light, and multiple braziers that kept the space warm. Their caretaker, a gentle older man named Zero, had tended the young dragons around the clock, feeding them, cleaning up after them, even singing them lullabies in a melodic local dialect. He bowed as Daenerys entered. Torchlight revealed the 3 hatchlings curled in separate corners of the enclosure, each gnawing on bones from a freshly butchered goat. The moment Daenerys stepped in, their heads snapped up and she felt that subtle tug at her soul, the first flicker of the bond that might one day rival what she had with Drogon, Viserion, and Regal. She moved slowly, letting them catch her scent, and they eyed her with curiosity. The gold-veined one let out a small growl, more inquisitive than threatening, while the red-veined one slunk closer, sniffing at the hem of her dress. "They have good appetites tonight, Your Grace," Zero said softly so as not to startle the creatures. The gold-veined one ate nearly twice his portion, but he's calm now. The green-veined one has been pacing around the walls, scratching. "I'm not sure if he's testing them or just restless." Daenerys nodded, crouching low so the red-veined hatchling could sniff her palm. It looked at her with eyes that shimmered like twin embers. She remembered how the first eggs she'd hatched were precious stones until they burst forth with life in the funeral pyre. These new ones had carried a taint, a darkness that threatened to unleash monstrosities instead of dragons. Yet here they were, mewling, hungry, and luminous with a fire that felt both familiar and new. "They may have inherited some restless spirit," she said quietly, stroking the hatchling's scaled neck. "Their birth was not ordinary. We purified them with Lawler's flame, but who knows what lingering instincts they carry from the Great Other's corruption. If you notice any unusual behavior, Zero, anything ominous or unnatural, inform me at once." He agreed fervently, placing a hand over his heart. "I will watch them closely, Your Grace. They seem healthy now, and if the darkness remains, it's hidden well." The gold-veined hatchling let out a short hiss, directing it not at Daenerys but at some unseen mote in the air. Then it crawled toward her, a comical waddle on its still-growing limbs. She gently ran her fingers across its ridged spine. It gave a soft croon, nuzzling her hand. These newborns, she reminded herself, were also her children as much as the older three. Her desire to see them prosper burned just as fiercely, but responsibility weighed upon her. If one day they grew to rival Drogon in size or close to it, the power she wielded would be immense, and with that power came a host of enemies seeking to exploit or destroy them. The Great Other's worshippers might never cease in their attempts to twist dragons to their own ends or to wipe them out entirely. Part of her feared the future these hatchlings might face. Still, seeing them nuzzle her hand, she couldn't help but smile. Life had a way of rekindling hope even in the darkest times. That night, the dreams came again, swirling shapes and half-heard voices. She lay in her chambers, the moonlight spilling through an ornate lattice, and drifted into a vision of an endless desert. She stood upon shifting sands under a sky split by lightning. Drogon soared overhead, roaring, but beyond him stretched a swirling mass of black clouds that formed a monstrous face. She heard chanting in that dream, low and insidious, beckoning her. Figures in black robes knelt around a circle, sacrificing lambs and letting the blood run in streams that pooled into shapes of dragons. She wanted to move forward to intervene, but her feet were stuck in the sand. Then, suddenly, a pillar of golden flame erupted beside her, and a tall silhouette emerged, a woman whose eyes burned like embers. She reached out and touched Daenerys's forehead, whispering words in an ancient tongue. The clouds overhead split, revealing a searing light, and the robed figures shrieked as though scalded. Daenerys felt the heat of that light course through her veins, waking her from the dream in a surge of heart-thudding alarm. She sat up, gasping for breath, her nightgown soaked with sweat. For a moment, she saw the afterimage of that silhouette as though an echo lingered in the real world. She did not know if it was the Red Woman, Melisandre, or some other priestess, or if it was Rhaenyra's own manifestation. But the intensity of the vision left her trembling. The next morning brought no immediate relief. Missandei visited her bedside early to deliver a sealed dispatch from the expedition. The message came from Ser Brendan, the Westerosi knight she had placed in command under Kezar's spiritual council. The news was grim. They had indeed found signs of the cult in Lazer, villages emptied, black shrines erected in abandoned huts, symbols drawn in blood. No direct confrontation had yet occurred, but the atmosphere was thick with fear. Worse, local shepherds spoke of robed strangers capturing their flocks, stealing away in the night, and chanting curses at the moon. Rhaegal had scouted overhead, but the cultists stayed hidden by day, appearing only under darkness. Ser Brendan speculated they might be using underground warrens or tunnels beneath the hills. If so, routing them out would require patience and cunning, or else a method of drawing them into the open. Daenerys paced her chamber, reading the letter twice. She could feel the frustration in Ser Brendan's words. They had marched swiftly, but the cultists seemed to vanish. Now, the Freedmen's Shield risked dividing into smaller search parties, which could be risky if the cultists launched ambushes. Kezar had attempted to perform rites to lure the servants of the Great Other out of hiding by challenging them with holy fire, but thus far, only silence greeted his efforts. The men grew uneasy, haunted by glimpses of flickering lights on distant hillsides at night. Some began whispering that the cultists were conjuring wights or other unholy fiends. The letter concluded with a fervent request for guidance from Daenerys herself. She read the lines where Ser Brendan wrote, "We all remember your victory at Tyrigon's cradle, your grace. It was your dragon's golden flame that banished the gloom. Without you or Drogon here, we labor in uncertainty." Daenerys grimaced, wishing she could be in two places at once. She summoned Grey Worm, Missandei, and a few seasoned advisors to discuss the matter in a quick war council. The consensus was that if she personally led another force to Lazer, Meereen might become vulnerable. The Freedmen's Shield was strong, but rumors of Volantene fleets prowling the coast, possibly allied with the sons of old slaver families, had begun to circulate. She cursed the cunning of these foes who seemed to coordinate from multiple directions, dividing her focus. Still, she could not let the cult's corruption spread unabated. While her council debated, Daenerys stared at a map laid out on a carved wooden table. Her ring finger traced a route along the painted mountains and the valleys leading to Lazer. She imagined Rhaegal flying overhead, searching for hidden enclaves. It was possible the cultists had knowledge of old fortresses, natural caverns, or labyrinthine passageways. A memory surfaced of her dream from the night before, the robed figures chanting, blood forming the shape of dragons. An uneasy thought emerged. Had the Great Other's followers found a way to harvest the lifeblood of animals or even people to power some ritual that might corrupt living dragons from afar? She shivered at the notion. If such a thing were possible, the newborn hatchlings in Meereen could be at risk, even behind thick stone walls. She shook her head, focusing on the discussion around her. It was Missandei who voiced a proposal. She suggested sending an elite infiltration team, fewer than a dozen, disguised or traveling lightly to avoid drawing attention. They could slip into the contested region at night, locate the cult's lairs, and signal to the main force where to strike. Grey Worm nodded, saying the Unsullied had infiltration units well trained to adapt to any environment. The Freedman's Shield might rely on straightforward confrontation, but the Unsullied could be more subtle. Daenerys considered this idea carefully, seeing potential in it. With Khazar to guide them, the infiltration team might detect signs of the Great Other's presence. Then Regal and the Freedman's Shield could converge on the site en masse, hopefully catching the cult off guard. She decided quickly. "Do it," she said, voice firm. "Grey Worm, choose your best. Coordinate with Khazar. We'll dispatch them immediately. This can remain quiet. The infiltration team will slip out of Meereen at dusk and rendezvous with the main column in Laser within a few days. If we learn the precise location of these robed zealots, we can finish them in a single strike." Grey Worm inclined his head. "As you command, Your Grace. I will see to it they are prepared. Should we have the infiltration team bring one of your older dragons for added support or rely solely on stealth?" At that, Daenerys frowned and thought. Viserion remains in the city and Drogon as well. The infiltration team needs stealth, not spectacle. Let them go without a dragon. If they find the cultists, they can send a raven or another swift messenger to the main force. Regal will handle the aerial assault with Ser Brendan. Viserion and Drogon stay here with me. I will not leave Meereen undefended. Not now. So it was settled. That evening, under the cover of darkness, a small group of Unsullied handpicked by Grey Worm stole out of the city, traveling in common garments on swift horses. Khazar remained with the main force in Laser, so Daenerys sent a confidential courier ahead to inform him of the infiltration plan. She hoped that within a night, perhaps sooner, they would have more precise intelligence on where to strike. The plan felt sound, but her nerves hummed with tension. She had learned that no plan survived contact with the enemy, especially one that trafficked in shadows and cunning. Nevertheless, she had to trust in her men and in the guidance of the Red God's flame. The following days brought no sudden word from Laser, leaving Daenerys to her duties and her mounting anxiety. She spent hours in the city, overseeing rebuilding projects and hearing disputes, forging alliances with local guild masters to boost Meereen's economy. She conversed with local healers to ensure the city's infirmaries were well-stocked, mindful that lurking enemies sometimes turn to poison or disease to weaken a foe. All the while, a sense of foreboding loomed at the edges of her consciousness. Missandei encouraged her to rest, reminding her that she could not save everyone if she wore herself ragged. Daenerys smiled wryly and acquiesced to short breaks, though she found little peace in them. At night, her dreams were a jumble of half-formed nightmares and flickers of hope. She would see her newborn hatchlings, shining in gold, red, and green, only for them to fade into silhouettes devoured by a swirling blackness that shrieked with an unholy voice. In an attempt to steady herself, she walked the streets of Meereen more frequently, unannounced, accompanied by a handful of guards and Missandei. She visited bakeries just opening their shutters before sunrise, purchased sweet pastries from wide-eyed children, watched potters at their wheels shaping clay, listened to fishermen unloading their catch at the wharves. The Freedman's Shield patrolled the city, but Daenerys liked to see for herself that the common folk were not living in fear as they had before. She spoke with old men who remembered the days of the fighting pits, women who now ran market stalls to provide for their families, and young men who had enlisted in the Freedman's Shield out of pride rather than compulsion. As she wandered, she heard less about petty crimes or slaver conspiracies. Instead, people asked about the rumors from Laser. Some had relatives there or ties to the farmland that bordered Meereen. Daenerys comforted them as best she could, promising that her men would protect them. She also heard a different rumor repeated, that the city's priests of Lawlor had experienced visions of a great temple of darkness rising near the Painted Mountains. According to the rumors, the temple thrummed with an ancient power older than Valyria. Daenerys could only wonder if this was another tale carried on fearful tongues or a kernel of truth. The wait dragged on until one blistering afternoon when a dusty rider galloped through Meereen's gates. The Freedman's Shield guided him to the Great Pyramid, where he nearly collapsed at Daenerys' feet, panting for breath. He was one of the Unsullied infiltration team, though he wore common garments. Blood was caked on his brow and the sinews of his arms trembled with exhaustion. Daenerys knelt to hear him calling for water. At length, he was able to speak in short, clipped phrases, explaining that the infiltration team had found a hidden canyon near the Painted Mountains, discovered an entrance to what appeared to be a vast network of caves or catacombs used by the cult. but they had been ambushed by masked figures chanting in a foreign tongue. In the struggle that followed, half the unsullied infiltration team was killed and the survivor escaped only because he played dead among the bodies. He managed to sneak away at night, riding until his horse collapsed. He had stolen another, pressed on, and finally reached Meereen to deliver the news. Daenerys listened, horror mounting in her throat. She could almost picture it. A labyrinthine underworld, torches guttering against clammy walls, robed silhouettes slipping through tight passageways, chanting their vile hymns. Her infiltration team had not been prepared for what they found, or else they had underestimated the cult's numbers. The messenger insisted that the Great Other's worshippers had a makeshift fortress beneath the earth, complete with underground streams and multiple hidden exits. He had glimpsed old stone columns carved with runes not quite Valyrian, perhaps older than that, maybe from the dawn of time, he could not say. The deeper the team ventured, the more evidence they saw of human sacrifice, altars black with dried blood, piles of bones. One of the infiltration scouts had insisted they press on to find the cult's inner sanctum, but that was when they'd been discovered and attacked. Upon hearing this, Daenerys clenched her fists in fury. The cult was not just a band of fanatics in the open desert, they possessed a fortress beneath Lazer, presumably connected to expansions in the Painted Mountains. If left unchecked, they could launch raids on the surface, capture innocents for their rituals, and vanish again below the earth. Her freedman's shield and Rhaegal could wander the surface for months and never find the exact entry point, much less the labyrinth's heart. A direct assault might end in catastrophe, as the labyrinth would be easy to defend. Yet the thought of leaving them unchallenged sickened her. She ordered the messenger taken to the infirmary, where Missandei could gather more details from him while he recovered. Then she convened her advisors again, including Grey Worm. The infiltration team's failure was a blow to her pride as well as a potential turning point in this clandestine war. Grey Worm spoke first. "Your Grace, if these cultists are entrenched below ground, we cannot fight them on their chosen terrain. We would lose too many men in a costly assault. Even a dragon cannot be fully effective in tight caverns." One of the Meereenese captains, a wiry man named Ricardo, not to be confused with the deceased Bloodrider by that name, argued that they could simply collapse the entrances, sealing the cult inside. If they're trapped, they'll starve in darkness. Or if there are more exits, we collapse them one by one. This idea sparked debate. Was it feasible? Did they know the full extent of the tunnels? What if the cult already had secret routes that stretched beyond Lazer? Collapsing only the known entrances might accomplish nothing. And if they collapsed everything at once, hundreds of innocents or enslaved captives trapped below could perish. Daenerys would not sign off on that kind of slaughter, not unless she was certain there was no other recourse. Missandei, still bearing the bandage around her shoulder, spoke softly. "Perhaps we could force them out. If we cannot fight them underground, we can make the caverns uninhabitable. Fire, smoke, or flooding directed systematically might drive the cultists to the surface, where Rhaegal and the Freedman's shield can crush them. But the scale of the operation would be enormous." Daenerys leaned forward, hands flat on the map table. The Painted Mountains loomed in miniature on the parchment, lines indicating ridges and valleys. She remembered the dream, the black clouds, the robed figures chanting. She recalled Kezer's words about illusions and shadowy illusions. It struck her that perhaps direct force, no matter how cunning, might not be enough. The Great Other's servants specialized in trickery, illusions, and fear. She needed an edge, something that could banish shadows in their own domain. "I will go," she said abruptly, lifting her gaze to meet the startled eyes of her advisors. "I will ride Drogon to Lazer. Let them see the Queen's might firsthand. If the caverns can be made vulnerable to the Lord of Light's power, I will ensure it is done." A wave of murmurs swept the table. Grey Worm cleared his throat, uneasy. "Your Grace, Meereen." "Meereen will stand," Daenerys cut in, her tone sharper than usual. She took a moment to steady herself. "You know I do not take this lightly. But if they have found a way to hide from conventional armies and from dragons in open skies, we need to strike at their core. I have commanded men to do it for me, but each attempt has cost lives. Our infiltration team was nearly wiped out. The Freedman's shield roams the surface, no closer to the enemy's heart. We must break the stalemate before it worsens, or else we risk not only Lazer, but eventually Meereen itself." Grey Worm bowed his head. "If that is your will, I will go with you." Daenerys offered a small, grateful smile. "I wouldn't have it any other way. Assemble a force large enough to hold the surface near the entrances, but not so large as to leave Meereen defenseless. Ser Geron will remain behind with a garrison to safeguard the city along with Viserion. The new hatchlings stay here as well, under heavy guard. I cannot risk them. We fly at daybreak in 2 days. Enough time to prepare and coordinate with Kezer by Raven. That concluded the matter. The die was cast, and Daenerys felt a mixture of relief and a mounting dread. She would face this shadow personally. If the Great Other's servants wanted to cower in darkness, she would bring Drogon's golden flame to their lair. In her private hours, she visited the newborn dragons, whispering that she would return to them. The gold-veined hatchling nudged her fingers, and she wondered if it sensed her apprehension. She also took Missandei aside and gently insisted she remain in Meereen. Missandei protested, saying she wished to stand by Daenerys, but Daenerys refused to budge. She could not risk losing Missandei again, not while her shoulders still bore the scars of the previous battle. Missandei finally agreed, albeit with tears in her eyes. The day of departure arrived quickly. Dawn rays lit the city's walls in shades of pink and gold. Daenerys, dressed in light armor of boiled leather reinforced with steel scales, stepped into the main courtyard. Drogon perched upon a newly constructed platform designed to accommodate his massive weight, a wide harness carefully strapped around his torso for Daenerys to secure herself. A selected force of Freedman's Shield, along with a detachment of Unsullied led by Grey Worm, stood ready. They would travel by land under swift marches. Drogon's flight would carry Daenerys ahead to scout and coordinate with Kezer. Ser Geron saluted her from a balcony, flanked by Viserion, who rumbled and flapped his wings in a show of farewell. High above on the pyramid's ledge, the three young hatchlings, far too small to join the battle, chittered at the departure, their calls echoed faintly by Rhaegal's distant roar in Lae'zel's direction. Daenerys climbed onto Drogon's back, fastening the harness around her waist and thighs, her heart thrumming in time with his. She remembered the first time she had ridden him in open flight, how fear and exhilaration had tangled in her veins. Now she felt only resolve. The men on the ground parted to a safe distance. She gave a short nod and Drogon tensed, wings unfurling. With a powerful leap, he launched them into the air, the courtyard falling away below. The wind whipped at Daenerys' hair and face. She clutched the reins, more a formality than a true control, for Drogon answered her body language and mind as much as her gestures. He climbed higher, letting out a roar that reverberated off Meereen's walls. People awoke to the sound, craning their necks to watch their queen disappear into the sky. The flight to Lae'zel took the better part of the day. They soared above fields, rivers, and rocky outcroppings, occasionally gliding low enough that Daenerys could pick out farmland or scattered settlements. She saw caravans scurrying away at the sight of Drogon's shadow, uncertain if he was friend or foe. The painted mountains rose in the distance, their vivid striations of red, orange, and yellow marred by deep ravines and abrupt cliffs. By the time she reached the main encampment of her forces in Lae'zel, the sun hung low in the west, casting long shadows across the rolling hills. A flurry of horns announced her arrival. Soldiers cheered, brandishing spears and swords. Rhaegal appeared from behind a ridge, flying in to greet Drogon with a roar of welcome. The two dragons circled each other in the sky, a mesmerizing dance of black and green scales shining in the dying sunlight. Kezer stood below, red robes dusted from travel, his staff clutched in hand. Daenerys landed near him, swinging down from Drogon's side with practiced ease. She took a moment to steady herself on trembling legs. Long flights always left her slightly unbalanced, then clasped Kezer's hands. "What news?" she asked at once, scanning the camp. Men bustled around them, some bearing fresh wounds, others carting supplies. She spotted Ser Brendan in the distance, overseeing a small group of Freedman's Shield. The infiltration team was correct, Kezer said grimly. The cult has fortified itself underground. Every attempt we've made to draw them out has failed. When we scour the surface by daylight, we find only old sacrifices and symbols. Come nightfall, the hillsides come alive with chanting and flickering lights. We send out patrols, but the moment we approach, the cultists vanish. It's like chasing ghosts. Daenerys squeezed his hands. Then we force their hand. We will not let them remain at peace, but we cannot march blindly into their labyrinth. She gestured at the painted mountains rising nearby. We'll set a perimeter around every known entrance. I have more men on the way, traveling overland from Meereen. If the cult thinks we are content to wait above, they may try a raid or a surprise. That's when we strike. Kezer nodded, though worry lines creased his brow. I fear that we face not just swordsmen, but sorcery that we do not fully understand. The Great Other's power is strong in darkness. Even a dragon's flame may not chase them all out if they hide behind illusions. Yet your presence here is a beacon of faith to the men. Rhaegal has done his best to keep morale up, but they needed to see their queen. She looked around at the soldiers, noticing the way their eyes glowed with renewed hope upon her arrival. It was strange to realize how much they placed their trust in her, as though she were some living embodiment of flame and salvation. She recalled the dream once more, the swirling black clouds parted by a golden light. Perhaps it was her lot to serve as that light. If so, she would not shrink from it. Organize the men to hold positions at night, well armed with watchfires burning. I'll direct Drogon and Regal to patrol the skies. They can't hide all entrances, not if we remain vigilant. If the cult attempts to move, we'll see them. Kezer bowed his head. I will gather the priests as well. We'll chant prayers to keep the darkness at bay. That night, the camp spread out in a wide crescent near the base of the mountains, establishing watch posts near known cave entrances. Daenerys had a large tent pitched for herself and her closest advisors, though she spent much of her time walking among the ranks to raise spirits. Men huddled around fires, spears propped on their shoulders. Occasionally, distant echoes resounded from the hills, uncanny wails or the faint clang of metal. Daenerys tried to parse whether these were natural noises carried on the wind or the cult's deliberate attempts to unnerve her men. She soon found herself wishing she had closed her eyes for a moment, yet her tension kept her wide awake. Shortly after midnight, an alarm rang from the northern watch post. Daenerys, already half alert, dashed from her tent, throwing on a cloak over her leathers. Kezer followed, staff in hand. She could see torches bobbing like fireflies along the ridge where the watch post stood. Overhead, Drogon and Regal circled, roars slicing through the night. Daenerys sprinted up the hillside, flanked by freedmen's shield-bearing pikes and swords. When she reached the outpost, she saw men clustering around a single survivor from a patrol, whose face was pale as milk. He gasped out that his unit had chased a group of robed figures into a narrow defile. The robed ones began chanting, and suddenly the patrol was beset by illusions. Apparitions of monstrous shapes, half-human, half-spider, that scuttled across the walls. The patrol panicked, and in the chaos, real cultists picked them off one by one. Only this man had escaped. Daenerys's fury rose like flame in her veins. She felt Drogon's presence overhead, a scorching heat that mirrored her own anger. "Kezer," she snapped. "Take me there. I want to see these illusions for myself." The priest's eyes widened. "It's dangerous, Your Grace. If the illusions remain, you risk succumbing to them as well." "I have faced illusions before," Daenerys replied. She remembered the warlock's house of the Undying in Karth, the necromancies in the catacombs of Meereen, the black smoke conjured at Tyrigon's cradle. Always, her dragons and her own inner fire had carried her through. She refused to cower now. "Gather a small group. Let's go." Within minutes, Daenerys led a detachment of Freedman's Shield and Kezer to the narrow defile. The moon shone bright overhead, giving them enough pale light to traverse the rocky ground. The watchers above signaled that Drogon and Regal soared on standby, ready to unleash flame if needed. Daenerys felt her heart pounding, part excitement, part trepidation. She could almost smell the tang of sorcery in the air. The narrow passage opened into a small bowl-shaped depression surrounded by jagged rocks. There, she saw scattered corpses of Freedman's Shield, their armor rent, their limbs twisted. The place stank of blood and dread. No robed figures were visible. She paused, beckoning Kezer to move beside her. "Do you sense it?" she whispered. His expression was grim, and he nodded. Indeed, an oppressive aura weighed on the air, like a cold wind that snuffed out candlelight. The Freedman's Shield advanced cautiously, weapons held high. The only sound was the scuff of their boots and the occasional rattle of stone. For a heartbeat, Daenerys thought the cult might have retreated deeper into the mountains. But then a soft chanting rose around them, echoing from the rocks, eerily disembodied. She felt the hair on her arms prickle. Her men stiffened, eyes darting left and right, trying to discern the source. The chanting grew louder, a guttural language that set her teeth on edge. A shape flickered across her peripheral vision, but when she turned, she saw only empty space. She heard a muffled shriek from behind her. Spinning around, she found one of her soldiers gone, as though plucked away by an invisible hand. Another soldier cried out, pointing, but there was nothing to see. The chanting rose in volume, seeming to come from every direction at once. Daenerys felt a wave of disorientation, her vision momentarily blurring. Shadows danced along the rocks, taking on monstrous outlines. She recalled the survivor's description, illusions, half spider or half serpent creeping across the walls. A shape with too many limbs scuttled in her peripheral sight, vanishing when she tried to focus on it. She clenched her fists, forcing her breath to steady. She would not let fear rule her. Beside her, Kezer raised his staff, chanting a counter-prayer in High Valyrian, invoking Lalares light to dispel illusions. A warm glow emanated from the obsidian tip, painting the rocks in shifting hues of red. The chanting of the cult, however, did not cease. Daenerys saw a tall figure step from behind a boulder, garbed in black robes with swirling patterns of silver thread. Its mask was carved to resemble a grinning skull with elongated teeth. In its hands, it clutched a blade that shimmered unnaturally in the moonlight. The figure hissed a challenge in that unknown tongue, then pointed the blade at Daenerys. She refused to be intimidated. Summoning every ounce of will, she bellowed, "Dracarys," though Drogon was not in sight. Even so, she felt their bond. A heartbeat later, a roar thundered overhead and Drogon hurtled into view, diving. His fiery breath illuminated the entire basin in brilliant orange. The masked figure raised an arm as if to defend itself, but the flames crashed down, engulfing the boulders. Daenerys felt a wave of heat surge past her, driving back the illusions. The freedman's shield cried out in awe and relief, though some still saw flickers of monstrous shapes in the corner of their eyes. When the flames subsided, the figure had vanished, no body, no remains. Only a scorched pattern on the ground. Smoke curled from the boulders, revealing a few twisted lumps of black cloth that might have been lesser cultists caught in Drogon's breath. Kezer's staff continued to glow and the illusions began to fade. Daenerys exhaled shakily, scanning for survivors. Enery spent time each day with them, feeding them choice cuts of meat, letting them grow used to her scent and presence. They were not large enough yet to roam freely. Her older dragons would bully them, but soon she would let them explore the pyramid's higher terraces. The city, too, was curious. Rumors spread that new dragons had been born, touched by a holy flame. Some revered them as living miracles, while others feared what it meant for Daenerys's power. She took care to keep them well guarded, mindful that enemies might try to kidnap or kill them. As the weeks turned into a fresh season, Daenerys noticed that Drogon never seemed to stop growing. He cast a shadow across entire squares when he flew overhead, and when he perched atop the pyramid, the stone groaned under his mass. In flight, he resembled a black storm cloud with blazing eyes. Observers said he was the largest living dragon in history and perhaps the largest that had ever existed. If she doubted it before, she did not now. But with his size came a weight of responsibility. A single pass of his flame could reduce entire districts to ash. She had to be careful with his hunts, ensuring he did not stray into farmland with precious livestock. He had grown cunning, too, capable of searching for prey far from settled areas. Sometimes he vanished for days at a time, returning only when summoned in her mind or with a clarion call from the city's horns. Each time he came back, Daenerys felt the swirl of that deep, ancient bond. The Lord of Light's presence, or some primal force, resided in Drogon. She sensed it whenever she laid a hand on his hide. They needed each other, especially now. She had no illusions that her struggles were over. The Great Other's cult might rise again. The old slaver families might rally new mercenaries. Pirates and unscrupulous warlords would continue to test her. Yet she felt a strange sense of unity in her purpose. She had chosen Essos, and Essos had chosen her. The freedmen, the dragons, the swirl of languages and faiths, this was the tapestry of her reign. She was not a tyrant, not a conqueror hungry for distant crowns, but a liberator forging a realm in which no one wore chains. At night, when she stood on the terrace and gazed at the shimmering lights of Meereen, she imagined other corners of this vast continent. Dothraki plains, the city-states along the Jade Sea, even the ghost-ridden lands near Ass High. So much of the world lay beyond her. Yet, for the time being, she was content to nurture the city she had, the people she had freed, and the dragons she had brought into the world. Sometimes, in her dreams, she glimpsed new visions, a circle of flames within which stood Drogon, wreathed in golden light, while smaller dragons danced around him. She saw illusions of a great darkness creeping at the edges, and she saw a shining figure, perhaps herself, perhaps another, standing between the darkness and the flame. Always, the dream ended with a single clarion cry, the roar of a dragon that shattered the night. She would awaken with her heart pounding, reminded that the realm of prophecy and the realm of flesh were intertwined for her, whether she willed it or not. She had come to accept that certain truths could not be separated from her destiny as the mother of dragons. One evening, she visited the topmost level of the Great Pyramid, a vast open terrace where she could see the entire city. Drogon lay curled on a specially reinforced platform, his tail hanging off the edge like a thick black cable. He observed her approach with a low rumble, shifting his bulk to make space for her. Daenerys settled against him, the living warmth of his scales soothing her. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and crimson, painting the bay with liquid fire. She thought of the wars she had fought, the allies she had won, the enemies she had burned. The cost was always high, and perhaps there was no final victory against every shadow. But she embraced the truth that she did not walk this path alone. Grey Worm, Missandei, Kezer, the Freedman's Shield, her 5 dragons, this was her family now, her kingdom. She had found a place where her birthright and her compassion fused, forging a future that might endure the storms of history. A gentle breeze rustled her hair, carrying the scents of the city, spices, smoke, the sea. Far below, she could hear distant shouts, the hum of merchants closing their stalls, the laughter of children running in the streets. Meereen might never be perfect, no city was. Yet she had given it a chance to rise from the horrors of slavery, to shine as a beacon of what a free people could achieve. And she would stand by it as she had stood by Lazer, as she would stand by any who turned to her for hope. That was her vow and her burden. As the final sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, she turned and rested her palm on Drogon's side. He stirred, and a golden glow seemed to flicker in his eyes, the vestige of a god's fire or perhaps his own soul's blaze. Daenerys found herself smiling, content for this moment, knowing that when the next threat arose, she and Drogon would be ready to defend the light they had created. And so the Mother of Dragons remained in Essos, not because she feared the 7 kingdoms, nor because she lacked ambition, but because her heart had entwined with this land of heat and dust, of free men and women who called her Mysa. She stayed for the newborn dragons who would learn to fly in these skies, unburdened by old feuds. She stayed for the Freedman's Shield, for Grey Worm and Missandei, for the children who danced in the streets at twilight, for the farmers of Lazer who need not fear midnight raids, for the blacksmiths of Meereen who made their living forging plowshares instead of chains. She stayed for the unwavering promise that light could triumph over darkness, so long as one was willing to wield the fire that dwelled within. And in her stay, she found a destiny greater than any throne, a destiny in which her dragons soared across a continent reborn, and the clarion call of their flight echoed with a single truth, that in the face of shadows, she was, and forever would be, Daenerys Stormborn, the unburnt, the breaker of chains, the mother of dragons, and the living flame that no night could ever snuff out.